Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Tuesday, March 19th, 2013. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Manny's in the control room, manning the phones. The number is always 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. We are waiting to hear if the vote on the bailout package in Cyprus is actually going to take place imminently. It's getting late in the evening over there. The vote was supposed to happen earlier today. It's being delayed and debated. They're talking about possibly delaying the vote even more. The stark reality is that the president of Cyprus only has about one-third of the parliament willing to go along with this plan to loot the bank accounts of the citizens to pay for the crimes and failures of the banks. And it's getting ugly over there. There are already protests outside the Cyprus parliament. They're chanting slogans, independence, freedom, democracy. They're talking about time to leave the European Union, ditch the euro. And they may postpone the vote. They're talking about maybe letting the banks open up tomorrow, maybe Thursday, maybe Friday. I think they're trying to avoid actually setting a firm date to basically prevent people from organizing mass withdrawals, and it's just turning into a really ugly, ugly situation. Now, the latest deal that the Cyprus government is trying to put out there is that they're going to reduce the levy on Cyprus depositors, and they're going to shift the burden onto the wealthiest depositors, the largest bank accounts, which include a lot of expatriates from Russia and Great Britain. But the European Central Bank is still insisting it has to be a total of 5.8 billion euros. If they can't come up with that, the latest bailout isn't going to work. So basically what they're doing is they're trying to refinance Cyprus's banks by looting the people, which is exactly what they did here in the United States of America with the bailouts. Take $1 trillion from the American people and give it to the banks so the banks can turn around and loan it back to the people at interest. That's all these bailouts are. So the people of Cyprus are very, very angry. The latest offer coming out of the Parliament and the ECB is that Cypriots with deposits less than 20,000 euros will not be taxed at all. So they're going to put the entire burden on the richest depositors because they're a small minority and will not be able to riot. I don't know that that's really going to work. I think it's the principle is upsetting people. And you'll notice this is getting no coverage on the corporate media at all. None at all. But there's already a mob around the German embassy. And they've stormed the building, and they're tearing down the German flag. They are very, very angry about this. I think the financial damage is going to far outweigh that 5.8 billion euros they're trying to come up with. And all across Europe, we're seeing commentary that citizens all over Europe now have to fear for the safety of their money. Yesterday, we put up a poll at whatreallyhappened.com. Do you feel your money is safe in the bank that you do business with? And overwhelmingly, people said no. They no longer feel their money is safe in the banks. Actually, it never really was. So you have, Cyprus. It looks like they're going to reject the EU bailout deal. That means a default on the Cyprus banks. That means triggering some of those credit default swaps Wall Street has sold against Europe's accumulated debt. J.P. Morgan is out there screaming, if Cyprus doesn't pass the bailout, there'll be a risk to the financial markets. Well, you know something? We need to make a choice. What is more important? The people of planet Earth or this arbitrary religion called private central banking? And we need to make that choice. I vote people of planet Earth. We'll be right back. And aloha, welcome back to the show. We're going to grab a phone call here. Mike in Chicago. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I got a couple questions. What is the difference between a credit union and a bank? And I know they're insured differently. What is the trust fund? And is gold? I haven't really been paying too much attention, but has it been increasing by hundreds of dollars since this crisis? And Okay, and that's it.
Okay, well, basically, in theory, a credit union is set up for the benefit of a particular group, and it operates almost as a small-scale state bank, where the goal is ostensibly to serve the community rather than to enrich its owners. They are insured differently. Unfortunately, credit unions, because they, like everybody else in the United States of America, are required to work with Federal Reserve notes. And when they need to get reserves to go to the Federal Reserve, they're tied in with the system. So in terms of safety, they're about the same as the banks. They tend to be a little less exposed to the high-risk investments. And again, that's because they're not driven entirely by the desire for profitability. As far as the price of gold, we're coming to understand that gold and silver have been manipulated downward, even though J.P. Morgan got off the hook for that whole scandal. So at some point, gold has to break free of all the manipulation and start upward. In the long term, again, go back to 1971, gold was $35 an ounce. Look at its price today. It really is a good way to preserve wealth. I don't consider it an investment because it doesn't lead to job creation and manufacturing and sales of products, but gold is a really wonderful way to preserve your wealth against an inflationary currency. And that's why it's a really good idea to get into that.
Right, so if I bought a Canadian maple and then turned around 10 years from now and put it on eBay, I'd be able to get something from that.
You probably would be. I'm not sure that eBay is the ideal place to be selling that kind of stuff, but yeah, definitely 10 years from now there will be a sizable return on it.
Yeah, it's preserving your wealth. I'm not looking to make to be speculating. I'm not speculating. I'm preserving wealth, and I think people need to realize that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All of this quantitative easing, and yesterday the Federal Reserve said they're going to have to go on doing it forever. I've got all these bugs here in the studio today. I don't know why. They're probably micro-drones spying on me or something. But no, absolutely. Gold and silver will preserve and hold its value against currencies that are the values being inflated away, which is what we're seeing pretty much everywhere that there's a private central bank in operation.
Right. In your days on Earth, Mike, you haven't seen a dollar that is in a bubble, a bond market that is in a bubble, and a stock market that is in a bubble, and a currency war going on. This is dynamic. This is unbelievable.
Yes.
This is something that even you haven't seen. Go ahead and comment, and I'll just listen.
Okay, well, you're absolutely right. Bubbles are something that are created artificially by the money junkies, because when they're riding the bubble up, they make huge amounts of money, then they bail out, the bubble bursts, and the losses are dropped on everybody who came in because they thought it was going to be a wonderful investment opportunity. Tulip Mania was a bubble. The Great South Seas Company was a bubble. Now the stock market's in a bubble. The Treasury bonds are bubbled. They've overprinted the Treasury bonds to support quantitative easing. And again, you're right. You don't really see gold and silver as subject to that manipulation because there's a finite limit on supply. Although obviously back in the 1980s there was an attempt to bubble up silver during that Hunt scandal. But it's all subject to manipulation. And at any chance, any opportunity, these bankers are going to manipulate things to their own benefit. They're going to do it. We know about the LIBOR scandal. Now the British government is starting to look into the possibility that Barclays and the other banks involved in LIBOR were rigging what's called the London fix on gold and silver. And it's like politicians. We need to stop asking when they're lying and start focusing on those rare occasions they tell the truth. The same thing with the financial centers. We need to stop asking what are they rigging and what are they cheating on and just say, where are they being honest? And the answer is very, very little. Okay?
But what is your favorite gold coin, Mike, before I go?
I really don't have a preference. I'm not in a position to be investing in gold other than my wedding ring here. I like a well-made artistic coin, but really if you're buying for the melt value, it almost doesn't really matter which coin to go with as long as you're getting it for a decent price. And it is a 24-karat gold coin. Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Yes,
we're going to switch over to Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Scott, are you there?
Hey there, brother. How you doing there, Brother Mike? You better check on your dress maybe for a fruit that went kind of the wrong way with all those flies, fruit flies or something in there, big guy.
Well, springtime, all of a sudden, the insects start doing what insects do in spring, and No, there's literally one day every spring where there'll literally be hundreds of these bugs and flies all over the walls, and the next day they're completely gone. And I'm not sure what they are. I'm not an entomologist. I don't even play one on television. But I'm noticing today it's definitely out there. And part of that, of course, due to budget cuts, the Hawaii state government has cut back on what they politely call vector control, which is pest control, mosquitoes, Polynesian rats, and the rest of it. And, of course, that situation's going out of control, and we've had a couple of dengue fever incidents here on the island. So,
yeah, that's not good, Mike.
Yeah.
Mike, I wanted to really call in and talk about the situation with Cyprus over there. You know, I called in a while back, brother, about the situation that would go back to 2008 with the Lehman Brothers, that long firm that closed up. We had Black Week Fridays across, triples across over that continent over there. We've seen Circuit City just totally go belly up. When I see this pattern, Brother Mike, I see Cyprus now, they're trying to say, people, we're going to hammer you on your 401ks and your checking accounts. This, to me, is setting up for another furry market major crash, and it's in the same bloodlines of this May 1st that you were talking about a while back about the Radio Shacks closing, or Blockbusters. It's the same pattern, Brother Mike, that I see what's coming, and I think as we get a little bit down the road, as you were talking about pushing the can down there, these guys are running out of the last straws, like you were saying.
They absolutely are. They absolutely are. And the reason for that is very simple. Most of these Western economies are supported by consumer spending, which, labor precedes capital. You've got workers who go out, they'll earn money, and they'll spend it into the consumer economy. That will power the rest of the economy for everybody to be playing. When you have governments and banks literally reaching down to that bottom level of the economic structure and just starting to take money to prop themselves up, they're literally cutting the legs out from under that consumer economy. They're disincentivizing work and savings. These are all things which are negative for an economy in the long run. They're not thinking next year, 5 year, 10 years down the road. They're thinking the next quarterly stock report, and that's all they're thinking about. Okay?
Well, that's right, Mark, and I like your analogy of the boat. They got, maybe 50 holes in there, and they're running, every day they're losing a cork. And you were saying that they won cork and they missed one out of the boat. But every day, Mike, they're losing more corks to put in those holes. And what happens to that boat? It sinks faster.
Well, basically what's going on, you got it.
You take care, bro.
Yeah, basically what's going on, the private central banks are drilling holes in the bottom of the Eurozone boat faster than the European people can come up with new corks. And again, that is by design. When you have a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, debt will always outstrip the available money supply, and that's what's bringing it down. And now the people have been so impoverished, they don't want to borrow anymore. The governments can't borrow anymore. So now the bankers are getting desperate. They're desperate to just find ways to directly loot the people to keep themselves in wealth and power and privilege. Classic fascist economic pattern. And, of course, at the same time, this rush to really get a world war going to distract everybody from the fact that it was the bankers who caused all this hardship and starvation around the world. And they have done it before. Crash of 1907, distract everybody with World War I. Crash of 1929, distract everybody with World War II. Crash of 2007 and 8, look how hard everybody's pushing. Now they're back into saying, serious chemical weapons. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. But I want to wrap up here on the situation in Cyprus. Even the New York Times is now acknowledging that this grabbing of private citizens' bank deposits is going to spread to other vulnerable European countries. They're already talking about Italy, possibly Spain. We're hearing down in New Zealand they're considering a similar move. and Jeroen Dijsselbloem, I can't even pronounce this name, Dijsselbloem, Dijsselbloem, the president of the group of Euro area ministers, refused to rule out grabbing money from countries beyond Cyprus. So the lesson coming out of this is, if you think that's your money in the bank, it isn't. It's the banker's money. The instant you put it in, they think it belongs to them and they can do whatever they want with it, including just say, look, we're sorry, we screwed up our investments, you're going to have to pay for it. Where is the fairness and honesty in that? There is none. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about what's going on in Cyprus. We still have not heard if they've actually had the vote or not, but most everybody is saying the Parliament will vote down this deal that requires the looting of the citizens of Cyprus' personal bank accounts. And they should vote it down. But, of course, if they do, then Cyprus is basically going to go bankrupt, or to be more accurate, Cyprus's banks are going to go bankrupt. That'll trigger those credit default swaps. It's a nightmare whichever way the vote goes. And behind it all is, it doesn't matter how many laws or judges or politicians they wrap around this. This is theft. This is theft from the people to cover the losses and crimes and stupidity of the private bankers. That is fascism. I know there's a lot of articles all over saying, oh, this is communism, no, it isn't communism. Communism, socialism would be looting the bankers to even things out across society. And I don't want to go socialist either, but I don't want to live under fascism, and that's what they've got here right now. But you need to get back to understanding all a bailout is taking trillions of dollars from the American people and just handing it to the banks so the banks can turn around and loan it back to the people at interest. Does that make any sense at all from the point of view of anybody but a banker? Bailouts are legalized theft, just as the Federal Reserve is legalized counterfeiting. This is a criminal enterprise under color of law. It is a transfer of wealth from one group of people to a privileged special elite, the bankers. And they've been doing it for 100 years. Now, over at Der Spiegel, they're taking a very dim view of this whole situation. They're now saying Europe's citizens now have to fear for their money. Your money is more at risk in a bank than in your own home. And there's concerns that when the banks finally reopen in Cyprus, there will be a bank run. I don't see how they could possibly stop it. And it will spread to other countries. Now, yesterday when this story was first cranking up, we mentioned that Great Britain had pledged to their expatriates in Cyprus that they would be reimbursed for all losses. Now they're backing up. Now that they realize how much money they're talking about. Britain is now saying what they meant is servicemen, current servicemen to Britain, will be compensated for reasonable losses connected with their service in Cyprus. But for the pensioners who transferred their savings to Cyprus to save for their retirement, retired to Cyprus because it's a beautiful, beautiful land, they're going to get hit. They're going to get lost out here. So the bottom line here, the Great Cyprus Bank Robbery, that's what everybody's calling it now, shows that no bank account, no retirement fund, no stock portfolio is safe. Remember, they already have laws on the books here in the United States of America that in the event of a fiscal emergency, they can not only freeze your bank accounts, freeze the ATM machines, they can go into your safety deposit box to look for valuables like gold and silver. Now, New Zealand is putting together a plan to do just what Cyprus did. Go into everybody's savings accounts or checking accounts and grab a chunk of cash to prop up the banking system. Why? Why are you propping up a failed system on the backs of the people? It doesn't make any sense. It's counterintuitive. It is counter-evolution. If private central banking has proven itself a failed experiment, and it has, let it collapse. Let it go the way of the dodo bird. And go back to the system that provably works. Government issuing its own currency to buy what it needs. It flows through commerce without accruing interest to a private banker and is taxed back at the same amount at the end of the cycle to balance the books. That's the economic system the United States was started with. And it worked really well, which is why the bankers hated it. Go back and look at that article I wrote, All Wars Are Banker Wars. I reprised a whole bunch of my banker economic articles to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. Cyprus has woken everybody up. Even the most die-hard, in-denial citizen is now realizing there is something critically wrong with the banking system. And you go back to that All Wars Are Banker Wars and you look at what the British press were writing about Abraham Lincoln's greenbacks, about how terrible it would be to have a government free of debt, and what a danger it would be to all the banking clans of Europe. They hate the idea of people living without debt. It's time to let it go away. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Apparently, we're now getting some news from the Cyprus Parliament. The ruling party requested the vote be postponed. That was voted down. So the vote is going to happen imminently. The expectation is the measure is going to fail, which is going to be good news for the people of Cyprus, and it's going to throw the money junkies into an absolute paroxysm of nervousness here. Going to go back to the phones. Ted in Wisconsin. Aloha, Ted. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. I got a quick question for you, and I'll take my answer off the air. So what's going on with Cyprus right now with them trying to take 10% of the people's money? I'm kind of curious. Isn't that what the Federal Reserve is doing to the American people every time they print money?
Yeah, they are. It's just when the Federal Reserve is printing money, the loss of value is hidden, and most Americans, they complain about high prices and the rest, but they don't really comprehend the connection. The cost of your food and gas isn't really going up. The value of the money you already worked for and earned is being driven downward. And the problem from the money junkie's point of view, overprinting money not only wrecks the value of the money in the worker's pocket, it wrecks the value of the money junkies have in their stashed under their mattress. And that's why they would rather go this direction of saying, well, if we've got to prop up the banks, make the poor people pay for it, even though the poor people had nothing to do with it. And one of the weird things I heard out of the Cyprus debates was how Cyprus has to accept some responsibility to save the economy. Well, responsibility comes with authority. And if the people of Cyprus have no authority, if they're not allowed to say yes or no, then they can't be held responsible. And that's really what it comes down to here. All right, another phone call. Frank in New York. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing great.
Love your show.
Thank you.
I just had a question about what you've been talking about with the banks and stuff. You said you should have, keep what you need for your bills in an account and everything else under your control. But say you have, $50,000, $100,000. How do you keep that under your control and not in a bank?
Well, you need basically, that's a choice you have to make yourself. If you have that kind of surplus cash, I'd be getting into gold and silver right about now. And you basically...
Want that much in gold and silver?
Well, you don't tell your neighbors and friends that you have it there, so you don't make yourself a target. Or, obviously with that much, you'd want to spread it around. You'd have some in the cookie jar and some under the mattress and, some in a, you might want to think about investing in a floor safe that's hidden under a wood panel or something like that. But again, the reason there are bank robberies is the robbers know the money is there in the bank. But if the robbers don't know you have X thousands of dollars in gold and silver in your home, they're going to ignore you until some newspaper starts publishing lists of people who have gold and silver at home the way they're doing gun owners right now.
Right. All right, awesome. I just wanted to ask that question. I just wasn't sure what, I'm trying to figure out what to do here. And
well, you need to ask yourself, where is your money more at risk? People went to the banks because they were told their money was safe from bank robbers and their deposits was insured and everything. Cyprus has taught us, no, that's not necessarily the case. Yes, if you keep money at home, there's a chance you could be robbed. What are the odds of that robbery happening in your home versus all of a sudden the Federal Reserve deciding that they need to start grabbing your accounts? Now, again, the wealth confiscation in this country is being done a lot more covertly, seizing private homes through foreclosure fraud, bailouts, and the rest of it. But it still amounts to the same thing, propping up a failed banking system by looting ordinary people who had nothing to do with this financial disaster.
Right. Totally.
Okay?
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time.
You got it. And by the way, for those of you looking to get into gold and silver, remember, Republic Trading Group, they got an ad on my website. They got a banner at the top of republicbroadcasting.org. They will get you set up. And now is a really good time to do it. If you don't have a large amount of money to invest, go over to eBay and do the search term junk silver and just buy yourself a stash of those pre-1964 quarters, nickels, and dimes, which have inherent value to them, unlike the modern coinage, which is pretty much just gas station game tokens here. Now, getting back to Cyprus, over at 21stcenturywire.com, they're saying the Cyprus really needs to consider leaving the European Union economic slavery plantation. And that's a discussion we're hearing all over the European Union. Because, again, what destroyed the European Union was they started out with a private central bank, the European Central Bank, issuing the euro as a loan at interest and plunged Europe into unpayable debt. They've been trying to keep it propped up with France and Germany. Now France is getting sucked down. Germany's getting tired of this. And it's all because it's a Ponzi financial system. It's a criminal enterprise designed to loot wealth from the people of planet Earth and put it in the pockets of these private central bankers. They do not exist to serve the people, the community, or the nation. They exist to serve themselves, aided by politicians willing to sell the citizens into slavery to the bankers in exchange for a reasonable campaign contribution. Now, this latest offer coming out of the Cyprus Parliament, and again, it looks like it's going to fail, where they said we're going to not take anything from depositors with less than 20,000 euros, and we're going to shift the burden onto the large depositors. Obviously, that's going to impact Russia, because a lot of Russian nationals are living in Cyprus, doing business, both legal and less so, and they're going to get hit. So now Russia is being directly impacted, even though they are not part of the European Union. And that is leading to tension. And it's just a reminder, this could blow up into outright war, all because of the private central bankers. And obviously, the European Union is willing to simply ignore the rule of law to maintain their power. They're lying to their own people. I mean, the president of Cyprus, just a month ago, in one of his campaign speeches for the upcoming election, said, depositors are safe, depositors are safe. Well, not anymore. Now, turning to the U.S., Peter Schiff on Closing Bell is saying banks are just a few rate hikes from insolvency. They're just hanging on by the narrowest of margins. That's why they're having to keep the stock market up by hook and by crook. They're struggling to try and get that market back up into the green against what appears to be a very, very large sell-off, looking at the volume. And he's basically saying what we already know. The banks are in the worst shape they've ever been in. They're overextended. They're over-leveraged. They're too tangled up with the rest of the global economy to extract themselves simply and easily. And it goes even further than that. Cyprus may be taking money out of savers' banking accounts. The Obama administration is dipping into federal retirement funds to balance their budget. Yesterday, the U.S. government lost its ability to borrow more money because they hit the debt limit. Now, Obama and the Democrats want to raise the debt limit. There's no debt crisis. We'll just go on borrowing forever. The Republicans are saying, no, this has reached a crisis point. So, Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner is looting the federal retirement funds to keep funding government operations, because they've already looted Social Security. There's nothing in there but Treasury bonds that they can't make good on. So all you federal employees that stayed blindly loyal to the federal government and turned a blind eye to the evils being perpetrated and thought we were all conspiracy theory wackos for saying that everybody was at risk, welcome to reality. Because now they're taking your retirement away to pay for all of this. Now, the U.S. federal and state governments are considering moving forward with this plan to eliminate private pensions and retirement accounts and force everybody to liquidate, turn the money over to the government in exchange for a little retirement annuity. And it will all work out wonderfully well, forgetting that they already did that once before and it was called Social Security. And they're going to issue an order saying, give us all your money, and we'll give you a nice piece of paper in exchange for it. It is a major, major, major mess. So, let's see now. Alrighty. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, J.P. Morgan has won a dismissal of the lawsuit against them for silver price fixing. Jamie Dimon wins again. Too big to jail, too big to fail. J.P. Morgan was caught trying to manipulate silver prices to keep them down so that investors would not desert the stock market for metals. And apparently there's a very bizarre story that the whistleblower who exposed the silver manipulation scandal has been injured in a mysterious hit-and-run accident. And Andrew Maguire is saying basically, from as far as he can tell, it was an attempt on his life to show what happens to those who challenge the money junkies. Well, Andrew Jackson could have told us that. So would Lincoln and Kennedy had they survived, but they didn't here. Meanwhile, we're getting this story out of Visser.is. This is in another country, in Iceland. They've indicted 9 more bankers for market manipulation. And they're saying this is the largest case of its kind in the world. And they only got 9 bankers? When did bankers become above the law? I don't want to live in a society where people who have lots of money are not required to obey the same laws that I do. Because that's not democracy. It's not even a republic. It is, again, fascism. Now, I want to talk about this situation in Syria. The corporate media is trumpeting how Syria's President Assad has deployed chemical weapons against his own people. We saw this one coming a long time ago. Syria is saying the rebels did it. The rebels are saying Assad did it. The corporate media, of course, is, has to be Assad. Has to be Assad. But just stop and think. And remember, nothing makes the corporate media and the government more terrified than a population that's thinking. Why would Assad use chemical weapons fired into an area filled with women and children? Such an act does not benefit Assad at all. He's got nothing to gain by doing that. And Assad knows the United States is desperate for any excuse to justify a direct military invasion, and Assad is too smart to give that to them. But for that hired mercenary army, having failed in their assigned task to oust Assad for more than 2 years, firing a chemical weapon into an area where women and children are located provides dramatic headlines and video that their U.S. backers need. And so it makes no sense that Assad launched this chemical attack, and every bit of sense and logic that it's coming from the hired mercenaries, to be blamed on Assad. And everybody was saying this was inevitable. And of course, coincident with this chemical weapon story is the story of a supposed Syrian air raid on Lebanon, where Assad's jets supposedly struck targets near the town of Arsa, Lebanon, yesterday. And everywhere I've seen this reported on the corporate media's websites, comments are blocked, and I can understand why. Again, take a moment to think. Why would Assad, who is mired in this fight against the hired mercenary army, waste his limited military resources on an attack in Lebanon, which gains him nothing at all? There's no point. There's no motive. Now, we have nothing other than the word of the corporate media, the same people who lied to you about Saddam's nuclear weapons, that the jets that attacked Lebanon were from Syria. We already know that Israel has been flying their warplanes along the Syria-Lebanon border as they did to do their recent bombing attack in Damascus. And Israel has a long history of false flag attacks, such as when they used unmarked planes to attack the USS Liberty and tried to frame Egypt for it. And how long does it take to change the paint scheme on an airplane? So the most logical conclusion is that Israel, not Syria, staged this attack to build the case for a direct invasion of Syria. They're ganging them up. Chemical weapons, Syrian warplanes. And that's what's going on here. Now, over in Korea, apparently United States B-52 bombers are carrying out simulated nuclear bombing raids on North Korea as part of ramping up the tension there. Corporate media is saying, oh, North Korea bad, North Korea missile. It's the U.S. that is starting to wave the nuclear weapons around. I think they're trying to spook North Korea into doing something dramatic that they can use to say, all right, got another war going on there. Ought to make the money junkies happy. Now, turning to Iraq, we've now been at war in one form or another in that country for about 10 years. Started bombing Baghdad 10 years ago this week. All on the claim that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, and Saddam aided 9/11, and Saddam was buddy-buddy and trading wet kisses with Al-Qaeda, all of which turned out to be lies. And so more and more people are starting to ask a question. This is over from Op-Ed News. What happened to the Constitution of the United States of America? How could a small group of neocons around President Bush, including Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, just throw us over the cliff into a pointless war? And of course, it wasn't pointless from the money junkies' perspective. War creates debt. Debt creates profits. And the real issue, of course, was that Iraq was selling their oil for the euro instead of the dollar, with the permission of the United Nations. We've been there 10 years. Victory is impossible in terms of the public eye. Because we were all told it was about weapons of mass destruction and 9/11 and Al-Qaeda, and all of those have been proven lies. So it is impossible to achieve the publicly stated goals of the war of Iraq. We just endure, and our children suffer and die for it. Apparently there's been a string of attacks across Iraq being claimed on insurgents and so forth to celebrate the 10-year anniversary. I think it's another PR stunt. The United States doesn't want to leave Iraq any more than they want to leave Afghanistan. Interesting story, though, coming out of Ex-Republic TV about all the intelligence that could have prevented the Iraq war was completely ignored. Even the BBC came out with a documentary about how the Iraq war was started with lies and deception. More about that when we come back. And aloha America, welcome back to the show. We're just now getting word the Cyprus Parliament overwhelmingly rejected this new bailout deal requiring a looting of their own savers' accounts. The people of Cyprus are cheering and clapping and very, very happy, and the bankers are saying, oh, gee whiz, we thought this was going to work. And so that is definitely going to rattle the world markets here, because, and especially in New York, because don't forget, Wall Street recklessly sold something like $90 trillion worth of credit default swaps against Europe's debt. I don't know off the top of my head what portion of that was related to Cyprus, but it's going to be a considerable amount. And these Wall Street firms selling credit default swaps, because it's unregulated, unlike normal insurance, they're not required to keep cash reserves to pay reasonably expected claims. It's a repeat of what happened to AIG. that was selling credit default swaps on all these mortgage-backed securities, and when it imploded, AIG simply did not have the funds to deal with it. So this is going to have repercussions. Now, I got an email from a listener here I wanted to read to you. I noticed something. The banks are really starting to advertise for credit cards again. I haven't seen ads for credit cards in a long time. Now almost every commercial's for a credit card. Yeah, we noticed that here. Every day in the mail we're getting, you're pre-approved for a $25,000 car loan. I don't think it's because I have a good credit rating. They're just desperate to find more borrowers to prop up the pyramid. See, the way it works is, the instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, is loaned into circulation at interest by that private central bank, more money exists, or rather more money is owed than actually exists. The only way to keep that scheme going is to find new borrowers to allow the creation of new money, part of which is used to pay the interest on the old money. And they keep it going by always finding larger and larger pools of new borrowers, student loans, homes, consumer debt, anything they can find. And when the consumers are maxed out, that's when the Keynesian economists turn to the government and say, you have to borrow. You have to borrow gobs of money to keep the banking system secure. Until they reach a point where the consumers don't want to borrow anymore and government can't borrow anymore. And that's when the money junkies will start a world war to force everybody further into debt to fight that war. And then even further into debt to rebuild after the war. It's this horrible three-step process that we have seen time and time again. And when it's all over, people have what they had before, except the graveyards are bigger and they're on the hook to the banks for another 100 years. And they're trying to do it a third time. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as we reported just before the top of the hour, the Cyprus Parliament has overwhelmingly rejected this bailout deal that involved looting the private accounts of the citizens of Cyprus. And this may calm things down in terms of bank runs and concerns in other European countries to do the same. We know they were talking about doing it in Italy. Now they're talking about doing it in New Zealand. Do you really think this means it won't happen again sometime in the future? Of course not. When the bankers get desperate enough, anything can happen. Laws goeth before conscripted income. Now, turning over to Libya, things are not doing very well there. 2 years ago, went into Libya because Gaddafi dared to have a state central bank and a value-based currency, the gold dinar. That cannot be allowed to stand, and of course it wasn't. Went into Libya, killed Gaddafi, gave them a brand new private central bank, issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. The gold for the gold dinar vanished. And they were brought back into the warm embrace of private central banking, as the god Mammon hath decreed over and over again. But the situation is, Libya is not stable. The Libyan people don't like having their country stolen from them. Apparently there's been a major clash at an oil field belonging to Libya's Waha Oil, where a local militia went into the security, basically went into the field and attacked a security force. And so it looks like the people of Libya do not like their new U.S. puppet regime or their new private central bank. Now, as you know, tomorrow Obama is going to be in Israel making obeisance, getting his photo op with his yarmulke in front of the Wailing Wall and all the rest of these other things that he needs to do. The White House is already trying to backpedal and lower expectations of this trip. Originally he said, I'm going there to discuss peace with the Palestinians. They said, no, not really. And they're saying, it's a photo op. It's no big deal. He's going there to talk to Netanyahu about how to kick up the war with Syria, is what's going on there. Now, Obama had said he was going to visit Ramallah. Looks like that is probably off the agenda as well. Obama is only going to spend 4 hours in the West Bank, including a visit to the Nativity Church. In other words, he's not going to see the reality of life in the West Bank. Israel's going to take him to the Nativity Church and a couple of other selected places that look okay, and that will be it. Now, Netanyahu is warning of enormous threats in the region ahead of Obama's visit. And I'm concerned that Israel may stage a false flag attack. Worst case, they would actually kill Obama, frame some Palestinian for it or some Iranian for it, and put Biden in the Oval Office. Biden is very pro-Israel, and he has an advantage over Obama in the eyes of the Israelis. Obama's in his second term. He doesn't need Israel anymore, doesn't need their political support. But Biden, in his first term and eligible to run for re-election in 2016, is going to do everything the Israelis tell him to do. Second case is Israel fakes an attack against Obama that they thwart in order to make Obama grateful to Israel for saving his life. So false flags are us. That's what they should rename Israel. Going to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back here, and we're following events in Cyprus. Obviously, the Cypriot people are extraordinarily delighted that their parliament has voted down this deal that involved looting their bank accounts to prop up the banks themselves. I don't think this means a bank run is not going to happen when the banks reopen, because this move rattled everybody. Now, it may not be as big a bank run, but I think probably a lot of people are going to be rethinking about leaving all their money in the bank. And again, back to the common sense advice. You should only have in the bank what you need to cover your obligations and keep the rest under your control. And that is the operative word, control. When your money is in the bank, it's not under your control. It's under the bank's control. It's under the government's control. They can reach in and just take it with a few strokes of a computer keyboard. From their point of view, it's not your money, because it was loaned to you at interest. The bankers see it as all their money. The Federal Reserve views all of the currency in circulation as really belonging to them and is only loaned to you. And it's just ink and paper anyway. Now, again, getting back to Obama's visit to Israel tomorrow, Netanyahu is out there making statements about how he's now going to pursue a peace deal with the Palestinians. And he's ready to make an historic compromise if the Palestinians will return to the negotiating table with goodwill. Goodwill is a code phrase. What Netanyahu is doing is just cheap theatrics ahead of Obama's visit to make it look like something useful is being accomplished when the real agenda is more war. Look at how long Netanyahu has been in power. If he hasn't moved towards peace by now, he never will. Look at how many times Israel has hauled off and launched these unprovoked attacks against Gaza during Netanyahu's time in office. Netanyahu is going to play the same game he has always played, the same game Israel has always played. Claim they want peace, then make impossible demands on Palestine to prevent any progress from being made, and then blame the Palestinians for being unwilling to work for peace. Israel always says you have to acknowledge Israel's right to exist before we do anything else. And the Palestinians say, well, you need to acknowledge Palestine's right to exist. And Israel says, no, we're not going to do that. And then Palestine comes back and says, well, at least tell us where your borders are so we know what is being acknowledged. And Israel won't do that. And so the trap there is, if Palestine acknowledges Israel's right to exist, Israel can redraw their borders with a dry erase marker and say, well, you know, all these Palestinian villages have to go because they're now part of Israel, and you said we have a right to be here. It's all about trying to look good while doing bad. And so I guarantee you, nothing's going to come of this. Israel plays this game. They'll get into a meeting, they'll make a deal, and it's always, oh, one more thing. And they'll agree to that. Oh, and one more thing. And they'll agree to that. Oh, one more thing. Until finally the opposing side realizes Israel isn't there bargaining in good faith. They're going to push and push and push until they've made demands that are politically unsupportable on the opposing side. So the talks collapse and Israel says, we tried. They wouldn't agree to our reasonable demands. It's all their fault. Going to go back to the phones. George in Texas. Aloha. Welcome back. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing fine.
Well, speaking about safety deposit boxes, I went to a garage sale last night, and they had a bunch of junk jewelry for like about $1. I picked up a whole box. I'm thinking about just spray painting it gold and sticking it in a safety deposit box and printing up fake bonds and sticking it in there, too. just to find out when they all find out. I mean, we should all do this.
Oh, I got an even better idea. Get an old laboratory beaker like this one. This is a prop from one of the shows I worked on, and just seal the top, put some powdered sugar in there, put a label on there saying anthrax, then break it and put the pieces in the safety deposit box. That'll wake them up. But the only thing I ever use a safety deposit box for are off-site backups of my wife's music and my website. We don't even do that anymore. We couldn't afford the safety deposit box any longer. But when we had one, that's all we had in there were a bunch of CD-ROMs. And
but it'd be a good idea. Spray paint gold and silver junk jewelry and just print up a bunch of fake gold certificates, whatever. Make them think they made a killing, only to find out it's only worthless after they. I mean, it don't really cost us nothing, really, and they just waste a whole bunch of resources for nothing.
Yeah, it is going to take a long time for them to drill out all those boxes and everything like that. So that might be a fun thing to do. Anything else, George?
It's just a thing. Did you hear about if somebody can find, there's a story out of ABC in Los Angeles saying there was a glitch with Chase Manhattan banks where everybody's account went to zero.
Practice. They're practicing for the Cyprus move here in the United States. Yeah, there do seem to be a lot of these glitches going on. There was apparently a glitch that inadvertently drove the Israeli market higher briefly. And this gets back to what I was talking about the poor state of our computers and software. It's even affecting corporations now. I'm going to be talking about that later in the show because I've had a heck of a time since last Friday dealing with all of these issues. But again, when you're dealing with banks, you need to understand, is it a glitch or did somebody throw some garbage data in there to move the market in a certain direction long enough to make a quick buck? And we're seeing a lot of that. Okay?
Mike, yeah, I got a small local bank that's chartered by the state. It's a non-Federal Reserve member bank. It's not a member of the Federal Reserve. And I asked them, and they said, well, we're state chartered. The federal government has no jurisdiction in here.
Well, that's definitely a better way to go, but as long as every bank in the United States has to use Federal Reserve notes as their legal tender, they're still tied into the system. They're still vulnerable. And when the cash and safety deposit box grab starts, it will hit every bank everywhere. And yes, I think being in a small bank that's chartered by the state, small community bank that's not tied in with these large corporations, is probably a little bit safer. But ultimately they're all at risk because they're all tied in with this same Ponzi scheme financial system. I mean, if the dollar is destroyed by a collapse of the Federal Reserve, then your dollars in a small credit union or small local bank are still going to be worthless.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you, Mike.
All righty. Now, down in Buenos Aires, Argentina, the Jewish community has mounted a huge commemoration of the embassy bombing and the Jewish community center bombings. And they're making a big deal about it, how horrible Iran was to do these things. And what they're doing is they're putting this big public relations push out there to reinforce the official myth that Iran did it. Because Iran and Argentina have now agreed they're going to go back and have their own investigations into what happened. Iran says they had nothing to do with it. Argentina is starting to believe them. And again, with Israel's well-known history of false flag attacks It is likely Israel did this to build sympathy, to destroy political ties between countries. Remember the motive for the Levant affair in Egypt. Israel didn't like the fact that the United States and Great Britain were getting diplomatically close to Egypt. And so Israel had their agents go into Egypt and start bombing American and British assets, planting evidence to frame the Egyptian Muslims for it, until one of the bombs detonated prematurely and they caught the bomber and found out it was an Israeli operation. Which at the time Israel said, oh, it's an anti-Semitic plot. We would never do anything like that. And then finally they said, yeah, you caught us. And then, of course, there was the attack on the USS Liberty that I mentioned earlier in the show, where Israel tried to sink a U.S. ship and kill the U.S. sailors on board and frame Egypt for it. And there was a nuclear-armed strike in the air on the way to Cairo. When the crew of the USS Liberty finally got their radios working again, had to replace the antennas which were shot away in the first attack, and they got a message out. These are Israelis attacking us. And then LBJ came in and said, well, we'll just say it was mistaken identity. We can't embarrass our friend in the Middle East, no matter how many Americans they murder. So it's all lies and propaganda and deception here. If you want to know what's really going on with the Israeli mindset, there's another scandal involving Israelis and Facebook. There was apparently a bus accident in Jordan, and 17 Palestinians returning from a pilgrimage for religious purposes were killed in the accident, dozens more injured. And Israelis on Facebook are saying, yes, it's great, may all Arabs die, blah, 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 blah. Now, let's change context on that a little bit. Let's say that a bus full of high school athletes on the way to an away game in the Deep South, and they're mostly black students on the bus, and the bus gets into an accident and all those students get killed. And all of a sudden, white people stand up and say, yes, may all black people die, huzzah, huzzah. What would your reaction to that be? Well, the same thing applies here. So Israelis are out there on Facebook saying there's nothing better than a dead Arab. That's the real mindset of what's going on there. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the world press is already responding to the vote by the Cyprus Parliament, saying it'll have a calming effect on the Eurozone. I think quite the contrary. I think the damage has been done. I think everybody just woke up to the reality that ordinary people are going to be made to pay for the bankers' crimes, corruption, and outright stupidity. Reminds me of the book and later the movie The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. And there's this wonderful line in there, the poor are always made to pay for all. And that's exactly what's going on here. Going to go back to the phones. Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I'm just calling up to link a couple of events here, and first we got the Cypriots and what's going on in Cyprus, and the fact that the Russian oligarchs and got their money out, several $1 billion they got out because they were tipped by the banksters.
Yes.
If you look, I'm trying to draw a thread. The thread is the Russian oligarchs, who 9/10 of them were Jewish, tipped off by the bankers, who are 9/10 of them are Jewish.
Yes.
And then.
So you're surprised?
Well, I'm not at all. I'm just linking these things. But then you look at the article that's on what really happened about the World Jewish Congress. Then is trying in their best to get Greece, which of course is rioting, and they don't have our political correct sensibilities that we have in the United States. They don't want to be, the Jewish bankers don't want to be identified as Jewish bankers, so they're trying to get, they don't want to be the subject of the wrath of the Greeks, so they're trying to get, all that passed in Greece to make anybody look anti-Semitic who calls a spade, basically.
Yeah, and it is interesting. In the middle of all the riots in Greek, I mean, the Greek Prime Minister is promising a Holocaust denial law. Now the World Jewish Congress is prevailing on the Greek government to outlaw any political parties who do not love Israel.
Right.
So, and you know, just like they have here in the United States of America, only politicians who swear obedience to Israel will be allowed to hold office. That's dictatorship.
And Michael, the timing is because, of course, they're going through this horrible austerity. They're being looted 6 ways from Sunday, and they know who the bankers are. They know whose pockets are being lined, and the World Jewish Congress in this case is so anxious to make a separation, to put up legal barriers and to separate the word Jewish from bankers, and indeed that's really though who they are. So that was my point.
Yeah, and I was looking at that article before about how the Russian oligarchs did get tipped off, and besides the Jewish link, you need to understand a lot of those oligarchs and a lot of those banks are involved in the same money laundering operations. So of course they're going to protect each other. The money always serves itself.
Yeah, I mean, the Jewish banker is going to protect the Jewish oligarchs. That's it.
Well, you know, we're coming down to a point where I think the entire planet's going to have to make a choice. Should the economy support the people, or the people support the economy? Under fascism, the people support the economy. And I think that's obviously, everybody can look around and see that's a bad, bad way to go for the people.
Amen to that. Amen to that. That's it for me, though. Thank you,
all right,
Mike.
You've got it. Now, down in Australia, okay, there's a scandal brewing there where apparently a bunch of Australian legislators are getting an Israeli-paid trip to Israel to learn all about the world through the eyes of Israel. And they're coming under a tremendous amount of criticism because Australia's got issues they're trying to deal with. Their economy is being dragged down by all this private central banking. They're having problems there. Why are you heading off to Israel? I mean, yes, we're used to the American politicians doing that. Now it's happening in Israel. And I have a point I want to make here. If Israel's got all this money to go around the world flying politicians to Israel and showing them around a really good time, they don't need all the money from the American people. So the corruption is just right out where everybody can see it. All righty, let's see. Now, going to the corporate media, a couple of scandals breaking there. Apparently down in Zimbabwe, the BBC was caught staging violence in order to portray Zimbabwe as a country riddled with political violence. They have enough on their own, but it wasn't apparently suitable for the cameras. So these 2 BBC journalists were caught stage managing violence for the cameras to demonize Zimbabwe. Well, we can't think too much about Zimbabwe sympathetically, not when they're walking around with these $100 trillion notes in their pockets, courtesy of it says right here on the front, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. When you see that word reserve, you need to run. Any place that's standing up against their bankers, ooh, they're bad, they're violence prone, they're terrorists. I've seen that pattern over and over again. Meanwhile, the Justice Department is investigating the Wall Street Journal for reportedly bribing Chinese officials in exchange for inside information. And of course, the Wall Street Journal is one of the papers now owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Going to go back to the phones. Nathan in California. Nathan, thank you for waiting. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. It's honored to speak with you. Just a very, excuse me, I'm just getting up here. Just a very quick question. I just wanted to see if you thought that there might be, you might have to help me with my question. It's a little odd here. But do you think there is a phenomenon that might be classified as presidential serial killer syndrome? In other words, and not to pick on Obama, all of our past presidents have the ability to kill people when they want to. But when President Obama orders a drone strike somewhere in the world, is he really killing a terrorist, or is he killing his father? You understand?
Yeah, I understand your psychology there. Which father are you talking about? Which father are you talking about? Barry Obama Sr. or Frank Marshall?
Maybe both of them, I don't know.
Well, only one of them is his real father, and frankly, looking at the faces, it's Frank Marshall.
Okay, Frank Marshall. Okay, well, I was thinking of his father that went to Kenya and abandoned him when he was a kid, that type of thing. But the real point is that you know, when people get in power, like mafia bosses, cartel bosses, or even the FBI, they worry when a bank robber is robbing banks, he's a serial bank robber, and then all of a sudden he kills somebody. Then they worry that he's going to be killing again and again and again.
Yes.
And this is what I'm concerned about, is when the president, you know, starts to kill, does it become sort of like a disease, you know?
Well, you know, people, you know, soldiers and police officers and people who are in a position of having to kill often say it does tragically get easier the more that you do it. And in Obama's case, he's not actually doing the killing. He just gives an order. He doesn't have to look at the dead person or all the collateral damage in the face. It's very abstracted and remote. Even those guys operating the drones, it looks like a video game to them. They're looking at these thermal imaging. It's just a white blob. And they're not having to actually look at the blood and guts that they're causing. And we've almost made killing so abstracted that it has lost all humanity. And I really think that back when armies had to face each other with swords in their hand and leaders had to lead those armies, I think war was seen as something to be avoided a lot more back then. It's too clean these days. It's too sterile. It's too robotic. And that's why it's so easy to get these things going.
Okay. Well, I certainly appreciate your answer and your time. Love your show very much, and I wholeheartedly agree with many of your points on Israel. And as a young grandfather, somebody could pay me $5 billion, offer me a check for $5 billion and say, all we want to do is send your grandson over to Israel or the Middle East to die. And I would never accept any amount of money to send my grandson over to the Middle East. But a politician, what, 50,000, 100,000?
Yep.
They'll send your kid over there, and if he gets killed, they won't lose a wink of sleep over it. And I think
it's not their kid. It's not their kid. It's a form of slavery, is what it is. When members of Congress will sell your children into the servitude of a foreign government, that's slavery. Slavery's back in America here. Now, I want to make one more point before I let you go. I don't think Obama is being capricious in his dealing of death around the planet. Obama is not really in control. Sorry, Mr. President, and all of you people who monitor this show for the White House, he's not really in control. Obama is doing what the money junkies are telling him to do, and he's in the middle of circumstances that have been created around him that constrain his options. I think the drone strikes are a form of terror to try and wear down the resistance of foreign countries, and now they're going to bring them into the United States to wear down the resistance of the American people. And I don't think Obama necessarily likes this or gets a thrill out of it. He just sees it as a necessary next step along the political path that is open before him. And I don't think it's capricious. I think the selection of these suspects they send the drones after is pretty much random. Yeah. But they're not thinking about the individual suspects. They're thinking about the psychological impact on the entire nation of the drone strikes. Same exact reason Nazi Germany was sending the V-1 buzz bomb, which was the world's first cruise missile, and the V-2, which was the world's first guided ballistic missile, into Great Britain. They couldn't really hit a specific target. It was just a terror campaign coming down from the sky.
Okay. Wholeheartedly agree.
All right.
Thank you very much, Michael. Love your show. Keep up the good work, and best wishes to you.
Thank you very much, and I will do my best as long as I can. A little bit of news from the world of the gun grabbers. Yesterday, thank you, there was a story where there was a poll saying that 1 in 5 Americans would likely surrender their guns peacefully if the government ordered a gun ban. And 1 in 5, well, you know, that still leaves 4 in 5 keeping their guns and telling the government to go jump in the lake. But we ran our own poll at whatreallyhappened.com. Will you peacefully surrender your guns if the government orders a ban? We basically got 5% saying yes and 95% saying no. So that's the reality out here. The gun grab appears to have failed. Bloomberg is already backing off and saying that an actual assault-style weapon ban is not likely to succeed. And now, in order to prove they weren't wasting everybody's time with this nonsense, they're going to focus on mandatory background checks at gun shows and private sales. And again, the real criminals won't go for this. They won't go into a gun show or a gun shop and buy a gun and do the background check. They'll simply steal the guns from the gun show or the gun shop or from a police car or from a private home, one of those ones listed in the newspapers around New York. So it's a policy that cannot work. But the politicians need to prove they accomplished something. After they made assault weapons an issue, they have to come up with something that looks like a solution, even though it really isn't. Interesting little story. This is over in the Daily Mail in Great Britain. Apparently, the police are going to be handing out these scratch and sniff cards that when you scratch them, it smells like marijuana. And they're handing them out to concerned citizens so they're familiar with what marijuana smells like there are any who don't already know, in order to help find the marijuana farms. Huge waste of taxpayer money. Somebody actually wrote in and said, are they going to hand out scratch and sniff cards that smell like female genitalia in order to detect prostitutes? It's amazing. It is just amazing here. The Obama administration is back out there screaming that warrantless tracking through GPS in your smartphone is needed to fight terrorism. Obama, the terrorists, are going to leave their smartphones at home. Or they're going to disable the GPS, which is easy to do, or they'll simply jam it or spoof it. Or they'll go to a yard sale and they'll get an old-style phone that doesn't have the GPS in it. It's another policy that can't work. And the only reason they're pushing it is to keep telling to the American people, we're watching everything that you do. We're tapped into those supermarket shopping cards, so don't buy anything we don't like. And it's a bluff. And the Nazis did exactly the same thing to the German people. They worked to create this illusion that the SS and the Gestapo were everywhere, listening to everything, watching everything, spying on everybody, so the German people wouldn't stand up when they saw their government leading them into disaster. And that's what they're doing here. There are 330 million Americans, most of whom have smartphones, with GPS, now that it was mandated. They can collect all the data they want. They can't correlate it. They can't derive anything meaningful from it. Plus, there's a high error rate in these systems. We'll talk about that a little bit later on here. Now, the Republican Party has issued their official report on why they lost last year's election for the White House. And let's see. They're saying basically the reason Mitt Romney lost was his campaign lacked the right message. He had weak preparations. His campaign structure and tactics were flawed. And his use of technology was behind the times. That has nothing to do with it. The Republican Party, repeating the same mistake they made in 2008, railroaded a popular Republican candidate out of the primaries, Ron Paul. And as a result, Republican voters, myself among them, stayed home in disgust at this betrayal of Republican rank and file by the party leadership. They made that mistake in 2008. Ron Paul could have whipped Obama. But we can't have anybody there who's not loyal to Israel and the private central banks, so they railroaded him out. And he came back in 2012, same message. Got to question our allegiance to Israel, and we've got to look seriously at the flaws of private central banking. So they railroaded him out again. And both times the Republican voters stayed home. If you're not going to give us the candidate we want, you will not get our support. And the Republicans are still in denial. They're out of touch with reality. And they're going to be fading into history very quickly unless they start opening their eyes and ears and realize they did it to themselves. Now, I want to have a quick comment here about Pat Robertson. Apparently, and he's just another money junkie. And it's a different religion, you know, the imaginary playmate instead of private central banking, but they're both arbitrary rules and beliefs that support the clergy. Pat Robertson is out there encouraging families who cannot pay their bills to become partners of his ministry for only $20 a month. The man has no shame. Now, I thought churches were supposed to help the needy, not loot them a little bit more. And by the way, the two churches that my wife and I are helping with their food distribution programs, they do that. They're helping the needy. Pat Robertson is out there saying, if you're in need, you can't pay your bills, send me $20 a month and I will pray for you. What a scumbag. Just amazing here. Now, speaking of religion, the History Channel is running a mini-series, The Bible, and apparently they've come under a little bit of criticism because the actor playing Satan supposedly looks a lot like President Obama. Now, I have not tuned into this show for reasons that you will probably all understand. And they're going back and forth about this whole thing. Now, it may be this actor looks like Obama. It may be merely a coincidence. It may be intentional. Or this could be a public relations stunt, because they're trying to claim that this is the most watched TV series in America right now, and the numbers don't really support that claim. So it may be a PR stunt. And I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to mention it again real quick. When I was way back in college, and I viewed myself more as an agnostic, I was involved in the production of a Christian rock musical called JC. And in the weeks before it was going to open, somebody called anonymously our on-campus newspaper and said, not the on-campus newspaper, the Christian Students Union, and said, you wouldn't believe all the terrible things they're saying about our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. It's heretical. It's scandalous. And so the next day, during rehearsals, get a knock on the door in the Christian Students Union saying, can we come in and look at the rehearsals? And the director says, no. Rehearsals are closed. If you want to come and see the show opening night, you can come and see the show opening night. And the Christian students bang on the door harder and say, we have heard terrible things about your show. And the director says, you cannot come in. First Amendment, freedom of speech. So the Christian Students Union goes to the campus newspaper. They get a story written up about this horrible, scandalous treatment of Jesus that is being rehearsed on the on-campus theater. And ultimately, the president of the college got involved and said, you must let them see a rehearsal and let them pass muster on your show. And we let them into the rehearsal, and there was one moment in the show that was a little bit awkward. And the Christian Student Union said, you must take it out. And we said, no, we stand on the First Amendment. No, you must take it out. More newspaper coverage. And by opening night, we had taken that out of the show. And you know something? We had put that in the show to take out. Like Coco Chanel's bright orange feather on her hats. And I was the one who called the Christian Students Union. And by the time the show opened, we had sold out the entire run. And I think this whole thing about this actor in the Bible looking like Obama, it's a repeat of the same thing. They're trying to build buzz. People are going to tune in to say, does he really look like Obama? Anyway, I have since repented. I don't do dirty tricks like that anymore. Now, getting on to the climate and the weather. Spring officially begins less than 24 hours from now. Massachusetts has been slammed with another winter storm. Heavy wind-driven snow, snarling up the traffic. Schools had to close. It's amazing here. Down in Alabama, they're getting hit with a storm. 196,000 homes are without power statewide. Now, here's an interesting little story. This came out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain. What a difference a year makes. Satellite data is showing. Last year at this time, the world was 31 degrees centigrade hotter. In other words, since last year, on this date, the world has cooled 31 degrees centigrade. Tell me about this human-caused global warming and why we have to pay a carbon tax. It's a fraud. It's a scam. And anytime somebody says there can't be widespread conspiracies against the people of the world, you point right to this. Former Vice President, NASA, NOAA, the United Nations, IPCC, University of East Anglia, Hadley CRU, Penn State, were all involved in this gigantic fraud forecasting global warming and snow a thing of the past. And it has cost the people of planet Earth billions and billions and billions of dollars for a myth, for a fiction, for a fable. It's time to stop living in a world of lies. I will have a truthful government, or I will have no government at all. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Dan, the man, is now in our control room, answering the phones when you call on in. And the phone number is 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Now, continuing on the topic of human-caused global warming, insert ominous music here. One of the big lies that was being foisted on the world was global warming was overheating the ocean. The ocean is getting warmer. And, of course, that was a nonsensical claim right from the start. Okay? Pop quiz. How many active undersea volcanoes are there below the oceans of planet Earth? Hands? Anybody? Hands? Well, don't feel embarrassed if you can't answer the question. It's a trick question. Nobody knows. Nobody knows how many volcanoes, thermal vents are on the floors of the world's oceans pouring heat into the ocean. And if you don't know that, you cannot subtract out that influence to make any kind of a definitive claim that human-caused global warming is warming the oceans. In any event, as it turns out, and we're getting this story over from Stephen Goddard's blog, measurements along the entire U.S. coast are showing sea surface temperatures are below normal. The oceans are cooling. Now, there's an interesting story. I meant to get to this yesterday when we were talking about the search for life on Mars and how NASA is kind of hemming and hawing and saying, well, we're finding these tantalizing organic molecules, but we may have brought them here, and we're finding this other chemical. And the Russians and the French are getting ready to mount a mission to Mars that will actually drill way down under the surface and look for organic chemistry, which obviously is going to preclude the idea of contamination. And if you're sending a spaceship to Mars to look for life, you sterilize it first. We did that on Viking. But there's this interesting story, and again, this is coming out of Daily Mail over in Great Britain, that scientists drilling down into the basalt of the Pacific Ocean, under the oceanic crust, they're finding a whole new form of life down there. They're calling it a parallel universe. It's isolated from the surface by all the seawater and all the sediment. And they're finding there's more life down there in conditions that you would consider to be extraordinarily alien. Now, I hope they're being careful bringing this up to the surface, because a parallel life form that evolved on this planet with this chemistry is potentially more of a threat to our biosphere than anything that might have been brought back from the moon or Mars. I remember that whole big thing about the Lunar Receiving Lab, how they were going to make sure that the Apollo astronauts did not bring anything back from the moon to contaminate the Earth. And then when Apollo 11 landed, the crew inside were getting seasick. What's the first thing they did? They opened the hatch and completely invalidated that whole protocol. Got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're talking about this discovery. Underneath 2.5 kilometers of water, hundreds of meters of sediment. They drilled into the basalt of the Pacific Ocean floor, and they're finding an entirely new ecosystem down there. Remember a few years back, before he found the Titanic, when Robert Ballard discovered these thermal vents in the ocean supporting a completely alien form of life that was living on chemosynthesis instead of photosynthesis. And the same is applying here, because obviously under 2.5 kilometers of water and hundreds of meters of sediment, there's no light powering this life that they're finding. And I'm starting to wonder, and people were always saying, how the heck did all these surface life forms get down to the thermal vents and evolve to live there? I think maybe it might be the other way around. That life evolved very deep in the crust where there was thermal energy and plenty of raw materials and chemicals. And over time, it adapted to moving higher and higher in the ocean until it crawled out on the land. I think they're going to find a lot more down there. And it underscores a reality that we should not be looking for life as we think we know it on other worlds, meaning life as it is on the surface of planet Earth. Because our own planet is reminding us constantly that life will evolve under all kinds of circumstances. We think Earth is a perfect place. We're very comfortable here. What? We evolved here. Of course it's perfect. These microbes evolving in the deep crust, they're perfectly happy and comfortable down there because that's what they evolved in. There are fish in the Arctic in water that is actually below freezing. And they're perfectly comfortable there because that's where they evolved. Anything that's evolved in the methane pools of Saturn's moon Titan is going to be perfectly comfortable there. We shouldn't start viewing the possibility of life on other worlds as by the benchmark of life here on the surface of planet Earth. It's ridiculous. All you need are the raw chemicals, a fluid medium to mix it all in, and an energy source to power it. And I think you're going to find life is going to pop up everywhere. I would not be surprised to find life floating in the atmosphere of Jupiter and Saturn in conditions that would be instantly lethal. And were an alien civilization to come land on planet Earth, they're not going to walk out of their spaceship completely naked. Which Hollywood loves to do to save money on costuming. So, anyway, by the way, on to the computer issue. And by the way, I'm looking at CNN. They're pushing this thing about Syria being behind the chemical attack on their own people. That's the propaganda. The airstrike into Lebanon, the chemical attack. We must invade Syria now. They're really in high dudgeon on that whole situation. And it's an obvious setup, and it's an obvious staging. Assad has no reason to do what he's being accused of doing. Chemical weapons, strikes into Lebanon. And there's a lot of reasons not to do that. But Israel and the United States and this hired mercenary army, yeah, of course they do. Alrighty, getting on to this, I'm going to spend some time on computers and complete my rant from yesterday. By the way, just a notification, the federal website that protects us from malware has now been hacked. Apparently it's been down since March 8th. There's a confidence builder. We're going to take a break for some commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the fascinating and amazing world of modern home computing here. And we're seeing this article that came out of ZDNet asking, will 90% of users always hate Windows 8? And they're commenting on the fact that Windows 8 is a commercial failure. People don't want it. ZDNet is taking the position that requiring users to learn a completely different way around an operating system is a problem, and yes, it is. But I think it goes beyond that. This unified interface, which makes your desktop operate like a smartphone, is very insulting to more expert users who don't want to be treated as the average unsophisticated tech consumer. Now, Microsoft is already announcing they're coming out with a new operating system. They're rushing it out to market, which means it's going to be filled with bugs. And they're talking about an interim program of hybrids. Windows 8 configured to look like XP. Let's go back to XP. Now, I want to talk a little bit about my bad week with computers, because I had a really rough time. Starting last Friday with my wife's printer developing an issue. And a lot of this seems to track back to the most recent automatic update from Microsoft that broke a few things. Then, of course, I lost my old Linksys router Friday right after the radio show. I bought this Belkin router because the store I normally go to for my computer supplies, that was all they had on the shelf, this one model of the Belkin router. And it turned out to be a disaster, and I worked on it over the weekend. Could not get it to work with all my devices. It appeared to have broken my wife's Skype, so that when my wife would start Skyping with video, it would lock up her entire computer. That's a side issue. We're going to come on to that. So last night, I finally did what I should have done before. I went over to this big box electronics store that I really hate to do business with because they have a terrible attitude toward the customers, and I spent money I do not have to buy a Linksys router to replace this 3-day-old Belkin. Brought the Linksys home, plugged it in, turned it on, everything connected immediately, except Claire's Skype. And I was out there looking at packet links and all the rest of it. Come to find out, apparently in this last Microsoft update, there was a change to some system drivers that made the Logitech Webcam 9000 Pro incompatible with the newest version of Skype. The instant Skype accessed that camera, it would lock up the entire computer. That's bad programming. It means somebody didn't initialize a pointer, or they're not checking for null pointers. And it's just a huge, huge problem. Why is this allowed to perpetuate? Well, because bad software and letting the hackers run amok, it stimulates the economy. People have to buy more security. They have to get service contracts. They have to buy 2 routers instead of 1. Actually, it's paralyzed the economy. I've been working my gluteus maximus off since Friday, and I have not accomplished anything useful. I haven't produced anything that could be sold as a profit. And everyone says, that's just the state of the way it is. No, it isn't. Have you ever noticed that devices that will cost corporations money if they're not working don't have these problems? Your cable box, the cable modem that brings your signal into your home, the modems on Vonage, they work perfectly, because if they're not, corporations lose money. So we know they can design and build robust systems if it's in their financial interest to do it. Which is why we have to bring back product liability. Now, I had somebody write in about my Belkin and said, you should have gone online and checked out the reviews and everything. Well, you need to understand something about product reviews online. Most of them are written by public relations companies and the company's marketing people. That's why they're always glowing. You can't find the problems until you actually have the product and know what the problem is, like this conflict between Skype and this Logitech webcam. And I solved the problem with Claire's machine by simply going to a different webcam. And until you have the product and you find the problem, you can't go out and do a web search, say, is there a conflict between this model webcam and Skype? And you'll get page and page and page says, oh, yes, it's a huge problem. When you go out there and you start looking at the sheer volume of people trying to find workarounds for all of these, you'll see the scale of the problem. We're working hard, we're not getting any work done. Maybe in the short term, putting out all this problematic software and hardware and dumping the quality assurance testing on the end consumer was good for the bottom line profit of these companies, but in the long run, they have paralyzed our economy. The money junkies like to say, you're all lazy. You're not willing to work. We are working. We just can't get work done. Because in your lust for a few more pennies profits, you're putting out tools that are unreliable. And as long as these computer and software companies are protected from liability for badly designed products, the situation will not improve. If you buy a truck for your business, and because of a design flaw, the truck crashes and you suffer financial harm, you can sue the manufacturer of the truck. But if you buy an accounting system for your company, and because of a design flaw it crashes and you suffer financial harm, you can't do anything about it. And so it's not going to be a surprise that we're buying accounting systems and bookkeeping this and the rest of it that don't really work. because it doesn't cost the corporations when they put out a bad product. We had that caller calling in earlier saying Chase Bank had a computer glitch that messed with their accounts for a while. So it's affecting them too. Now here's an interesting little story. This came out of Wired. There's this Australian gentleman by the name of Tim Hicks. And years ago, he decided that because there was no one global repository for manufacturers' service manuals, that he would scour the net, get copies of all the service manuals, and post them online for free. And his website is Tim's Laptop Service Manuals for anybody who needs to fix their own hardware. And apparently Toshiba has come in with a cease and desist letter saying to take the manuals off his website for over 300 Toshiba laptops. Why are they doing that? Well, apparently they don't want you to be able to fix your Toshiba laptops when they fail. They want you to go out and buy a new Toshiba laptop. It's another form of planned obsolescence, and maybe you can get away with that in a healthy economy where consumers have money to go buy a new computer or a new phone every 3 to 5 years. But we don't have that economy any longer. And it's another case of where money junkies are thinking about their money junkieism and they're not thinking about what's good for society as a whole. It's the same exact mentality that is leading the bankers to say, let's loot the consumers of all their money and that'll solve our problem. No, it won't, because consumers, once they're looted, they don't have any more money to go down to the stores and buy your products. And you're going to collapse anyway. Now, we understand money junkies are always going to think like money junkies. And corporate CEOs have no sense of social responsibility, other than as a fashion statement when they go out and donate to some charity for abused seal pups so that they can look good in the press. It is the federal government's job to maintain that overview of what is best for the nation as a whole, and our government has certainly abandoned that. Going to grab a phone call here. Dale in North Carolina. Aloha, Dale. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, good day to you there, Mike. Love your show, especially when you get into your technology rants. Here's an example I went through. I received a flyer in the mail, and it says, get internet, no matter where you live. Get it everywhere. Okay, so it's through a satellite. So I call up, and I'm asking the salesperson, I'm like, do you have this? And he's like, no. And I'm like, how come? And he's like, well, I can't get it here. And I'm like, well, the ad says get it no matter where you live. And I said, didn't you question that? And he's like, no. The thing to me, Mike, is that I like to research what I buy. And, if it's got shine on it and everything, everybody's like, oh, cool, yeah, I got to get that. It's the shiniest thing, But the thing is that people that are selling you the product don't know what they're selling. And it all revolves back to let's just cut corporate costs and make profit. And what you're doing is you're getting someone who's selling you something who has no idea what they're selling you, and we're supposed to just say, yep, I guess the guy said it's good. That's, are we supposed to take that as golden? Thing is, people just don't research anything anymore.
Well, you have to know what to research. You have to know what to research. If you just go out for those online product reviews, those are bought and paid for, covert advertising. We saw the same situation you're describing with Circuit City, where Circuit City, when they started to see a decline in sales, they fired their experienced staff who are on high wages and high salaries, who knew the products, who had technical backgrounds, and they brought in all these minimum wage people who looked really good and would read the cards and pass you stuff, and they were completely clueless. And as a result, consumers stopped going to Circuit City because they couldn't get their questions answered. And Circuit City, of course, then collapsed. And we're seeing the same thing now start to happen with Best Buy. As they're cutting corners, the first thing they do is they let their experienced tech-savvy staff go, and they get in a bunch of minimum wage people fresh out of high school who don't know any better, and they're giving out either they don't have any information or they're making it up. All they really know is what's on the little card. This is what it is. This is what it costs. And it's a very short-sighted policy, and it's hurting us. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Getting back to the world of computers and trying to find tools that will actually allow us to get productive work done. I mentioned the other day there's this company called AVS4U. A small company. They're starting to put out products. I just got their HD 1080p editor and Blu-ray authoring all in one tool. Very inexpensive, and I got it to replace the Adobe Encore, which I lost when Adobe ate itself, and I decided I wasn't going to bother reinstalling it. And I think what we're seeing with companies like Microsoft and Adobe, and all too often in the rest of industry, they don't work to make their products better. They'll start with a core product that they made their reputation on, and then from then on the push is, what can we add to this? Or what can we change to encourage people to buy the new one? And I think that's typified by Microsoft's Windows 8 and its Surface. Have you seen the commercials for that? They don't even really show you the machine all that closely. It's all the kids dancing and acrobatics and, you know, all this stuff going on. They're selling it as a fashion accessory without addressing its usability. And apparently that is also not a hot seller. And it's got some hardware problems as well. And I think it's a bad direction. It's decadent is what it is. It's always the new feature, the new look, something to get you to buy the new one. Planned obsolescence, force you to buy a new computer and new operating system every 5 years. It's why probably when this machine that I'm using right here finally dies, I'm going to replace it with a white box running Linux. And I can do that because I'm no longer in the film, visual effects, animation business, and I don't need a machine that will run the tools that I used to run on Windows. But it's very destructive of our economy as a whole. It's made the purveyors of these flawed products very rich, although they're in trouble now from declining sales because the consumer society has been looted, overtly and covertly. But Windows 8 should indicate this idea of an all-new operating system every 5 years. People are tired of that. Most Windows users want to stay with XP. I'm on XP on all of this stuff. Microsoft extended support on it in response to public demand, but they're still shoving Vista and Windows 7 and Windows 8 and whatever the new one is going to be, and they're going to change everything to make you buy all new whatever. And you can't do that in an economy where everybody is pinching pennies just to eat. People will just start learning to do without all this wonderful gizmo stuff. After this last 5 days that I went through, it's reinforcing. I don't like computers anymore. When I was a kid, you know, Commodore 64 and the Amiga, computers were fun. They were easy to understand. You could get in there. There was source code. You could fix your own problems. And they've become virtually so complicated, they become corporatized. They reflect, in a very real sense, the corporate structure that produces the products. And that's another reason why the people in these retail outlets don't understand what's going on. Anybody who really understands the products are being snatched up for, support companies, or by the providers of the computers and software themselves, or they're leaving the country, going to someplace else. Now, we already talked about the new internet scam. This is a drive-by virus that if you hit an infected website, it's ransomware. It'll come on, lock up your computer, say it's from the FBI, you've been caught in a copyright violation, or there's a new version that says you've been caught downloading child porn. You must pay a fine through this online payment system, and they'll give you your machine back. And it's not from the FBI, and the FBI can't find these people and stop them, even as the FBI is insisting they're going to track down those evil hackers who broke into celebrities' homes, and insisting that they've tracked all these other hacking attacks over to China, but they can't find these guys pretending to be the FBI. Apparently, Florida is considering a law to ban internet cafes now, following the resignation of Florida's lieutenant governor and the arrests of 57 people charged with money laundering and racketeering. Apparently, they were concerned a lot of this was being done through internet cafes to avoid detection. Obviously, that didn't work, but now they want to ban internet cafes. And once again, ordinary, law-abiding citizens are being punished for the crimes of the elites. Now, one small victory, the Supreme Court just issued a major copyright ruling on foreign buyers of textbooks, movies, and other products, saying that they do have a right to resell them in the United States without the permission of the copyright owner. This has been one of the most egregious abuses of copyright that we've seen come down from all these lawyers. The idea that if you buy a music CD, you're not allowed to resell it at a yard sale. It's just absurd. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We got callers waiting on the line. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take some phone calls here. Alberto in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, how you doing?
Doing fine.
Quick question for you. You talked about the other day about you had some proof that the States did land on the moon. So I don't know if that's on your website so I can check it out.
Boy, the money junkies must be nervous here. Okay, first of all, you need to understand that spacecraft being operated by foreign governments have directly imaged the landing sites now and see the lower stage of the LEM, the descent module, the footprints, the ALSEP, the little rover sitting there on the moon. Those foreign governments would not lie on behalf of the United States of America. Second of all, every Apollo landing site included something called the ALSEP, the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiment Package, which included a laser-ranging retroreflector. It's basically a high-tech version of a highway sign that reflects light back in the direction it comes in from. And even to this very day, any observatory on Earth and even amateur astronomers, given the advances in equipment that are available to them, can bounce lasers off those laser ranging retroreflectors to get the exact distance to the moon. So we know those are definitely sitting there. And, you know, if that's not enough proof for you, then there's really nothing I can do to help you. I mean, even the Mythbusters did this. They went to an observatory and they fired the lasers against the moon. And remember, this whole thing about fake Apollo landings is more of the same poison the well propaganda the government loves to pour onto the independent media and the blogosphere to make us look silly, so that the American people will stay mind slaves to the corporate-owned media and say, oh, we don't want to go to the... And you know why all of a sudden we're seeing all this no-plane and fake Apollo stuff coming onto this show? It's not because I'm a handsome and talented guy. It's because a couple of weeks ago, Rasmussen polls confirmed more Americans are now getting their political information from online, from the independent media, from the blogs, than they are from the corporate media. And they're trying desperately to figure out some way to corral the American people back into watching the lights and wires in a box, where they will get their daily dose of what to believe in, courtesy of the U.S. government. And so as far as this whole Apollo situation is concerned, this is now a dead issue. Foreign government satellites, Japan especially, have imaged all of the landing sites and confirmed the hardware is there, period, end of discussion. Anybody still pushing fake Apollo landings, or chemtrails, or HAARP, or no plane at the Pentagon, they are here to muddy up the waters, to try and destroy the credibility of the alternative media, of the independent media. I'm not going to use that word alternative any longer, as an attempt to bolster or to encourage people to go back to the corporate media, as the corporate media sits there even now screaming about how we have to go into Syria, they're using chemical weapons, they're striking Lebanon, and all the rest of that other stuff. All right, now on to Chuck in Texas. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing today, Mike? I wanted to harken back to the conversation you were having about designed obsolescence. And it's getting to the point now where every generation of tool, I'm a remodeler, and there's no such thing as a quality power tool anymore. They wear out in 2 years. They used to last for 15. It just runs up cost of doing business. Makes it to where we can't work for people who can't pay top dollar. I'm semi-retired now because it's just getting too expensive to do business. It's making men be out of work, and people being unable to afford anything.
No, you're absolutely right. I got an electric drill a while back to do some maintenance around our little home here, and the unit broke. Immediately. It's because it's all plastic housing. They don't make things out of metal anymore. It's all plastic, and even the gears driving the drill bit were plastic. That's the most high-stress environment there is. And I took it back, and they said, we'll give you a new one. I said, I don't want a new one that's going to break just as easily. Do you have anything more rugged? No, gee, we don't. This is all we're carrying. I remember a while back, I got my wife one of these food processors, chopper slicer thing, and the spindle on the metal blade was plastic, and it fell apart. That is the one component of this chopper subject to the most stress anywhere in the structure, and they made it out of plastic, and it fell apart. And it really is. The idea is, oh, it broke, I'll go buy another one. Oh, this one broke, I'll go buy another one. And in a healthy economy where people have got money, they'll put up with this nonsense. We can't afford to do this any longer. And that's why all these companies that make this cheap crap, or they order it from China, they're starting to fall apart. They're starting to fall by the wayside. Walmart is in huge trouble because they're a big, importer of these Chinese goods. And I'm not bashing China. China will make you what you want to order. If you ask China to produce you a nice quality product like the iPhone, they can manufacture it. Nobody in the U.S. could make the iPhone right now. But if we have all of these American money junkies who'll go to China and say, make me the cheapest piece of crap you can so I can maximize their profits. And China will say, well, if that's what you want, we're not happy with it, but yeah, we're here to please the importers. And that's where you get things like the Pan Digital tablet that I got from my wife, and it lasted all of 4 months, and Pan Digital's now out of business, and, well, they should be. And, it really is. Everybody in the American culture is so driven by maximizing profits, there are no other priorities. And I grew up in a time... I'm sorry, go ahead.
When this comes off the wheels and China will not accept the dollar anymore, in about 2 years, we will literally be digging in the dirt, to do our planting. I'm trying to find a high-quality rototiller.
Mm-hmm.
Forget it. They just don't make them. It's everything today. So we're a third world nation right now. We just don't know it.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was working in Italy on a film project back in the 80s, they were already going this route. The stores were filled with all this stuff that looked really wonderful, and it was all so fragile and delicate. I got myself a European man's shoulder bag. That was the fashion back then. It has nothing to do with whether I'm gay or not, as some of my critics online are saying. And it didn't even last, to Heathrow Airport before it started falling apart. And it's a terrible way to run your economy. And, of course, now Italy is in trouble. They're talking about confiscating their savings over there. You cannot run an economy on getting people to just constantly buy the same thing over and over again. And if you really think about it in the larger context, our financial system and our government are not progressive. They're not thinking about building a better future. Their agenda demonstrably is to have every American working as hard as they possibly can just to stay where they are, just to maintain the quality of life they built, but working constantly to be replacing all the stuff that is constantly wearing out.
Interesting thing. They've taken the broken glass theory of economics and turned it into, we'll sell you glass that breaks itself.
They are, but that broken window analogy really doesn't work. The
Exactly.
idea was that, you're going to spend money on the window you wouldn't have spent. That's not true. You're spending money on that broken window you would have spent someplace else, creating jobs, developing a new product. So that analogy is definitely fraud and fictitious.
And now they sell you a window that breaks itself.
Absolutely.
Great show.
All right, you got it. Well, I mean, that window that breaks itself, they're already talking about DVDs and Blu-rays that are only good for so many playings, and then they'll self-destruct. One of the downsides of this idea of content delivery over the Internet is it will have an expiration date. We're seeing more and more software companies are now going to rental rather than buying a permanent license. Because it's not enough, as these software companies are coming out with products that you don't want to buy the new versions. Like I went through with Adobe. When CS5 ate itself, I went back to Photoshop 7 and all the earlier versions. And I went over to Adobe's website to look about, maybe I'll risk the money to buy the new version. And the first thing I said, we will rent you the software. These are term limits software. And that way, you're constantly paying. And it's all about maximizing profitability. So it doesn't matter how hard you work to produce a product, whether it's special effects, visual effects for Lost or anything, you don't get to keep that anymore. It goes to the license holders of the software that you're using. It's another reason I'm glad I'm out of that business right now. Anyway, Chuck, you're absolutely right. The quality of our tools has deteriorated, and without tools, we can't rebuild this nation. And anybody in Wall Street and Washington, D.C. who just says, if we can just motivate the workers, we'll rebuild the greatness of the nation, we can't do it, because you sold us tools that are incapable of the job. And that is absolutely the bottom line. You, Wall Street, did this to yourselves. You, the federal government, allowed this to happen. It's not a question of whether the American people are lazy and don't want to work. We're working as hard as we can, but we are no more productive than the tools we have been sold. Going to go to Steve in Virginia. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. It's great to talk with you. We are really blessed to hear your show. We hear you on the archives when we can't hear the live show, and we get so enlightening, the information. We were wondering, I had a question about Fukushima. Is it possible to give an update or any info on the real status of the radiation for the country? You hear different versions, and some are worse than others, and on some of the other shows, and I didn't know if you had maybe a handle on what's really happening with that.
Well, part of the problem, of course, is that TEPCO and the government of Japan have been less than honest about what was going on at Fukushima, and that allowed a lot of people to let their imaginations run wild to the worst-case scenario, and in a couple of cases, the worst-case scenario turned out to be accurate. The current situation at Fukushima is they have lost power to the cooling systems on several, I think 3 of the reactor fuel rod cooling pools, as well as one of the reactors that still has the fuel melted in it. And without the cooling, the temperature of these rods is starting to go up. I think they've got a few more days to solve this problem before the coolant liquid starts to boil off and expose the fuel rods to the air. And at that point, it gets to be a really critical situation, because the fuel rods can reach a temperature where they'll spontaneously ignite, and you're going to have a plutonium rod fire just pouring highly radioactive smoke into the air. We know that even outside the evacuation zone at Fukushima, there are all these reports of horrible, horrible medical problems related to that. We know they're finding radioactivity in the fish off the coast of California. The reality is that a fish that's gets contaminated at Fukushima and then swims across the ocean is still just as contaminated, and it's a very dangerous situation. The U.S. government refuses to do radiation testing for any seafood. I remember right after Fukushima, the U.S. Department of Agriculture went up to Alaska to reassure the fishers up there they weren't going to bother testing. They knew the crab and seafood from Alaska was going to be safe. And I had a chance to actually talk to some of the cast from Deadliest Catch, because they came down here to Hawaii to do their end-of-the-year wrap-up. And one of their crew is a fan of the website and invited me over. And off the record, away from the cameras, what terrified these guys most was somebody in Alaska, some student, going down, grabbing a crab, putting up a radiation meter to it, getting a reading, and putting it on YouTube. So it's a case of they can't do anything about the situation other than to pretend it's not really a big deal. But obviously the crisis in Fukushima is not over. If they cannot get the cooling working again quickly, there's a real risk of escalation over there.
Yeah, and then the air currents I'd heard that mainly the northern tier states, certain latitudes were more affected. Does that make sense as far as the air currents?
Well, on the assumption that they're going to get the current situation with the cooling under control, I think airborne contamination has long since settled out onto the ground. It is the waterborne, ocean-borne contamination that continues to be an issue. And, of course, here in Hawaii and along the west coast of the North American continent, we're getting all this debris from Fukushima washing up on shore. Now, most of it doesn't come from Fukushima. A lot of Japan got washed into the ocean that's not radioactive. But for a lot of those isotopes, the shorter-lived isotopes have already decayed to harmlessness. The longer-term isotopes, I'm going to take a guess, most of them have sintered out down to the bottom of the ocean floor. The problem is, of course, a lot of harvested seafood are bottom feeders, like the crabs. And the possibility that they have ingested, process of bioaccumulation, needs to be looked at.
You know, we go to Trader Joe's and Whole Foods. We try to get what we can as far as organic, but you wonder, well, what's really organic anymore? You know, with all the toxins and the chemicals.
That's true. It may be organic, but it may have been grown in soil or in water that was contaminated.
Yeah, and I mean, they get stuff from California, and we've asked them about it, and they're kind of non-committal about how safely or how safe these, the vegetables, the produce is, and then as far as the tuna, these places sell tuna that's supposed to be good, and I've wondered about that.
Well, over in Japan, the stores actually have radiation meters over their produce counters, right next to the scales. It's become the new normal over there. Grab an avocado, put it in the scale, wipe it under the meter, and go on out of there. Unfortunately, the real problem is alpha ray contamination, because if the plant or animal has ingested an alpha source, the alpha rays are not going to get outside to be detected. But if you eat it and it gets into your gut, that's another. It's an ugly situation, and it shouldn't have happened. And we know that, again, they took shortcuts to save money that turned out to be a disaster. And I'm still not entirely convinced that we should ignore the possibility that Stuxnet was in Fukushima before the disaster and compromised the safety systems, because we know Stuxnet was designed to interfere with these Siemens controllers used by nuclear power plants. That's what it was designed to do in Iran. And then it broke free, it went wild. It was known to be around the Fukushima nuclear power plant before the disaster hit. And so the question is, did it get inside Fukushima? Did it compromise their safety systems? Because we know a lot of those systems did not work the way they were supposed to when the quake and tsunami hit. We're getting more reports that the plant was already in trouble before the tsunami came on shore.
Yeah, well, we were wondering if that was one of the examples. I'm sure there are others where this was done to them by design, because perhaps the Japanese government.
No, I don't think it was done by design. Nobody wants something like this to happen by design. I think it was just in their rush to get Iran, they didn't care what else was going to happen. Thank you for the call. Got to take a break. Back with more calls in a minute. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And just a real quick comment about Stuxnet. When Stuxnet was designed to interfere with the Siemens controllers being used by Iran in their power station and their reactor fuel rod processing facility, but it broke free and it wreaked havoc all over Europe and Russia, damaging industrial facilities. So, no, Fukushima was not deliberately targeted. Fukushima may have been a victim, just as all these factories all across Europe and Russia were victims of this lust to get Iran no matter what here. Back to the phones here. Mike in Minnesota. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. I was just wanting to give you like a little solution to your tool problem, man. You live right down the mile from Aloha Stadium. Go over there, was it Wednesday, if it's still there, there's a flea market. But look for the older used tools.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you, for instance, I have a Skill worm drive saw.
Yep.
Okay, I bought this used at a pawn shop in 1985. I still have it, and I use it quite a bit.
That is a very, very good idea, and my wife and I go down to that Aloha swap meet on a regular basis. And, sometimes we'll see older things, not just tools, but kitchenware, stuff like that we can just see is going to last a lot longer. And you're getting it at a bargain price. Bring it home, clean it, sterilize it, use it. And, that's a very, very good idea.
All your older tools, they have a little stamp on them. Look at the stamp and see where it's made. Okay, your American One Skill, when it was still made in America, was made in, I believe, in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
the Skill Tool Corporation. And the one that I have is. And like I said, I've had this thing 20-something years, and the only thing I've ever had to do to it is put a little lube once every so many years into that little well, and you just check the little brush.
Okay.
Brush.
Mike, out of time. Got one more call I want to get to, so thank you. We're going to switch over to Mark in Georgia real quick before the end of the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, blessings to you. I was just wondering, what's the scope of, is there some kind of banksters holiday going on in Europe, and how far is that spreading? Is that just in the, is that an isolated thing, or is that throughout Europe?
No, it's at the moment it is in Cyprus. Now, Monday and next Monday are legitimate legal holidays in Cyprus. They're trying to decide if they're going to reopen the banks tomorrow, or they may even put it off till next Tuesday, which is just going to increase the hardship on the people of Cyprus. I don't think turning down this bailout deal is going to calm everybody down. I think the damage has been done. People are realizing their money isn't safe in the bank, that at any moment, without warning, the bankers and the government can just simply say, look, we need that money more than you do. And I think we're probably going to see maybe not as large a run on the banks of Cyprus, but I think there's going to be a run on the banks of Cyprus.
Yeah, because like I say, I'm in the GOP delegate process, and I'm trying to figure out how to explain to people. Ben Franklin said a republic if you can keep it. And what we now have, sweeping aside all the empty rhetoric, we have a plutocratic oligarchy that has the outward trappings of a representative form of government.
It's fascism. It is fascism.
We need the Iceland solution in this country, and I think more people need to wake up. What the people of Iceland did, God bless them, we need to do that here.
We absolutely do, and I got to let you go because the music is playing and it's time for us to get out of here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay informed. Keep yourself fully informed. Make good choices. Share what you know with who you know, and aloha, America.